Welcome back to our system design series. Today we are going to discuss a foundational concept in software architecture, which is the client-server architecture. This model is one of the most widely used pattern for building applications, and understanding it is a key developing to scale and maintain your systems. Okay, what is a client-server architecture? Let's just make a small diagram so we understand what we are building. Let's say that we have a client and the client will be connected with something called a DNS. We will talk about what is it in a minute. And we have the server. It's a pretty simple architecture, to be honest. Let's assume that the clients want to connect to the server. For example, let's say that our server will return posts of a specific user. So the clients needs to get the post from the server. And if any two machines want to communicate with each other, they will communicate with the IP address. Like each machine has the IP address on the internet. So the client should know the IP address for the server in order to access it or ask it for anything or to communicate with it. But when you go to the internet, you don't type the IP address. Basically, you type like facebook.com or like google.com or whatever it will be .com, and this is called a domain name. So the client will just type the domain name, for example, facebook.com, and the domain name, when the client tries to type the facebook.com, it will send basically a request to the DNS servers. The domain name basically will get, each domain name has its own IP address. So when the client type facebook.com to the DNS will send back the IP address. Once the IP address is obtained, it will establish like a connection with the server. And this is what we call a client-server architecture. So what is exactly a client-server architecture? In a client-server architecture, the system is divided into two main components, the client and the server. These two components work together um, um, to provide services to the end user, each with distinct roles and responsibilities. So let's first talk about the client. The client typically is the user-facing part of the system. This could be like a web browser, a mobile app, or a desktop application. The client is responsible for interacting with the user, sending requests to the server, and displaying the results to the user. Key responsibilities of the client. First, we have user interaction, like the client provides an interface for the user, allowing them to interact with the application. For example, entering data or clicking buttons, for example. The second thing, we have sending requests. When a user performs an action, such as clicking a button or submitting a form, the client sends a request to the server to perform an operation or retrieve data. The third thing of the key responsibility of the client will be displaying results. Like once the server process the request and return the response, the client takes that data and display it to the user in meaningful way. And this is what the client is all about. Let's talk about the server. The server is responsible for processing requests from the client. It manages resources such as databases and performs the necessary operations before sending the required data or services back to the client. The key characteristics and responsibilities of the server, the first thing is processing requests. Like the server receives requests from the client, processes them, and performs the necessary operations such as querying the database or performing calculations. The second thing, we have a resource management. Like the server manages resources like databases, file systems, or APIs that the client may need access to. Third, we have sending responses. Like once the server processes the request, it sends the response back to the client, which could be data, an acknowledgement, or an error message. Like example of server like continues like with a weather app, for example. If you want to continue with that, because the weather app is one of the wild, like most used example in any system design. The server is where all the weather data is stored. If we have a weather app, when the client sends a request for the current weather, the server queries, I guess its database and process the data and sends the weather information back to that app. Um, if you wanna ask how do they communicate, I guess we did talk about how actually they communicate with there is they can communicate over like HTTP. Like in the client server architecture, the client and the server communicate over network, like usually using HTTP or other communication protocols. The client sends HTTP requests to the server, and the server responses with the requested information. This communication can either be synchronized or asynchronized depending on the nature of the request and response. Benefits of the client server architecture: first, we have a separation of concerns, because the separation between the client and the servers allows for better modularity and easier maintenance. The client is responsible for the user experience, while the server handles data management and processing. The second thing is scalability. The architecture allows for horizontal scaling of clients, meaning that more users can use the system simultaneously without overloading the server. Also, there is a centralized control, because since the data logic are centralized on the server, it's easier to manage and update the system, ensuring consistency. There's some sort of drawbacks actually in the client server architecture. First thing, we have a single point of failure. Like the server, we have only one server, so the server can become a single point of failure, because if the server goes down, all the client loses access to the services it provides. And a solution for that is to use a microservice architecture, so to have multiple servers like S1, S2, etc. There's also scalability challenges, because while clients can scale easily, the server may face challenges handling an increasing number of requests, especially without proper loading balance. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I hope you like my content. If you like my content, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss any video, and see you guys in future problems.